fringe benefits of being an English
or history teacher is receiving the occasional jewel of a student blooper
in an essay. The following
history of the world from certifiably genuine student bloopers was collected by teachers throughout the United States.
From 8th grade through college level.
Listen carefully and you will learn a lot.
The World According to Student Bloopers by Richard Lederer.
The inhabitants of ancient Egypt were called mummies.
They lived in the Sahara Desert and traveled by Camelot.
The climate of the Sahara is such that the inhabitants have to live elsewhere,
so certain areas of the desert are cultivated by irrigation.
The Egyptians built the pyramids in the shape of a huge triangular cube.
The pyramids are a range of mountains between France and Spain.
The Bible is full of interesting caricatures.
In the first book of the Bible,
Genesis,
Adam and Eve were created from an apple tree.
One of their children, Cain, once asked,
"Am I my brother's son?" God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Montezuma.
Jacob, son of Isaac, stole his brother's birthmark.
David was a Hebrew king skilled at playing the lyre.
Solomon, one of David's sons, had 500 wives and 500 porcupines. Ouch!
Without the Greeks, we wouldn't have history.
The Greeks invented 3 kinds of columns:
Corinthian,
Doric,
and Ironic.
Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice.
They killed him. Socrates also died from an overdose of wedlock.
In the Olympic Games,
Greeks ran races,
jumped, hurled the biscuits,
and threw the Java.
There were no wars in Greece,
as the mountains were so high that they couldn't climb over to see what their neighbors were doing.
When they fought with the Persians, the Greeks were outnumbered because the Persians had more men.
Eventually, the Romans conquered the Greeks. History calls people Romans because they never stayed in one place for very long.
At Roman banquets, the guests wore garlics in their hair.
Julius Caesar extinguished himself on the battlefields of Gaul.
The Ides of March murdered him because they thought he was going to be made king.
Nero was a cruel tyrant who would torture his poor subjects
by playing the fiddle to them.
Then came the Middle Ages.
King Arthur lived in the age of chivalry.
Victims of the Black Death grew boobs on their necks.
Finally, the Magna Carta provided that no free man should be
hanged twice for the same offense. The Renaissance was an age in which more individuals felt the value of their human being.
Martin Luther was nailed to the church door at Wittenberg for selling papal indulgences.
He died
a horrible death,
being excommunicated by a bull.
It was the painter Donatello's interest in the female nude that made him the father of the Renaissance.
The government of England was a limited mockery.
Queen Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen.
As a queen, she was a success.
When Elizabeth exposed herself before her troops, they all shouted, "Hurrah!"
Then her navy went out and defeated the Spanish armadillo.
The greatest writer of the Renaissance was William Shakespeare.
He lived at Windsor with his merry wives,
writing tragedies,
comedies, and errors.
In one of Shakespeare's famous plays, Hamlet rations out his situation by relieving himself in a long soliloquy.
The next great author was John Milton.
Milton wrote Paradise Lost.
Then his wife died and he wrote
Paradise Regained.
During the Renaissance, America began. Christopher Columbus was a great navigator who discovered America while
cursing bleep about the Atlantic. The winter of 1620 was a hard one for the settlers.
Many people died,
and many babies were born.
Captain John Smith was responsible for all of this.
One of the causes of the Revolutionary Wars was that the English put tax in their teeth.
Ugh.
In the end, the colonists won the war, and no longer had to pay for taxis.
Taxi! Delegates from the original 13 states formed the contended Congress.
Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were 2 singers of the Declaration of Independence.
Franklin had gone to Boston carrying all his clothes in his pocket
and a loaf of bread under each arm.
He invented electricity by rubbing cats backwards and declared,
"A horse divided against itself cannot stand."
Franklin died in 1790.
And is still dead.
George Washington married Martha Stewart and in due time became
the father of our country. The Constitution of the United States was adopted to secure domestic hostility.
Abraham Lincoln became America's greatest president.
Lincoln's mother died in infancy, and he was born in a log cabin,
Which he built with his own hands.
He also freed the slaves by signing the Emancipation Proclamation.
On the night of April 14th, 1865, Lincoln went to the theater and got shot in his seat by one of the actors in a moving picture show.
The believed assassinator was John Wilkes Booth, a supposedly insane actor.
This ruined Booth's career.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the Enlightenment was a reasonable time.
Gravity was invented by Isaac Newton.
It is chiefly noticeable in autumn when the apples are flailing up the trees.
Bach was the most famous composer in the world.
And so was Handel,
Handel was half German.
Half Italian.
and half English.
He was very large.
Bach died from 1750 to the present.
Beethoven wrote music, even though he was deaf.
He was so deaf, he wrote,
Love music!
He took long walks in the forest even when everyone was calling for him. Beethoven!
Beethoven!
Beethoven! Beethoven expired in 1827 and later died for this.
France was in a very serious state.
The French Revolution was accomplished.
Before it even happened!
During the Napoleonic Wars, the crowned heads of Europe were trembling in their shoes.
Then the Spanish guerrillas came down from the hills and nipped at Napoleon's flanks.
Napoleon became ill with bladder problems and was very tense and unrestrained.
Queen Victoria was the longest queen of the British Empire
She sat on a thorn.
for 63 years.
Her death was the final event which ended her reign.
The 19th century was a time of many great inventions and thoughts.
The invention of the steamboat caused a network of rivers to spring up,
Samuel Morse invented the code of telepathy.
and Louis Pasteur discovered a cure for rabbis.
The First World War ushered in a new era in the annals of human history.
Misquoted, misinterpreted.
Plagiarized and slurred.
Nothing is more important.
Then the written word.
Aw, mine shut off again.